I also read that on your Amazon thing that you've been to over 400 Renaissance fairs taking pictures.
All over the country.
Which was your home fair or
My home fair was Irwindale.
okay, we'll talk about that.
My second favorite was Arizona, and my third favorite was Northern. And Bristol was fourth.
Okay, I think that's going to get me started. Are you ready to go? Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. Fair can impact the senses in many ways. You can work at a booth and you can give somebody a turkey leg. You can work at a costume booth and give somebody a garland. Or you can be like my guest today, who can take a picture and give you an image of yourself out there. My guest today is Richard G. Lowe Jr. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate being on your podcast.
But before we get to the way you capture memories at fair, I'd like to ask you the traditional Fair Folk at Work first question, which was, who was the person who said to you, there's this thing called fair, and what did they say to get you out there?
Well, actually, I was just one of those tickets that they hand out at the supermarket I used to. Said, you get some percentage off. And I thought, well, whatever. I have nothing to do today. I'll go out there. That was my first time. So it wasn't a person. It was somebody handing out coupons at the supermarket.
Where was this?
It was in Monrovia, California.
And was this for the Agora Fair?
It was for the Irwindale Fair,
I see.
which
And
was actually in Devore. It was in Devore.
do you remember the initial impression or sensation that the fair gave you?
Well, I was super shy and super introverted at the time, so I enjoyed it a lot, but crowds of people used to drive me crazy. So I had a lot of fun, but it was a bizarre experience for me. Let's put it that way. But I brought my camera and video camera at that time, one of the big bulky old VHS cameras, and I still have the videos there on my website.
What part of you was overwhelmed when you went to the fair? Was it just the crowds, or was it all the people in tights speaking at you in funny languages?
Reminded me of a circus atmosphere, which was a lot of fun. And as I got more and more into fair, I realized how it's like a circus community. And I don't mean that in a negative way, it's a positive way. And I was fascinated by it. And I love to take pictures. And I just stood around and did a lot of photographing and really didn't talk to many people, went to the shows, ate some of the food, wandered around. I think the second time I went with a friend and just had a good old time.
How old were you when you first went to fair?
Well, it was in the 1990s, so I must have been in my 30s.
You said you were sort of introverted. Give me a picture of the kind of person you were before you ever entered a fair.
Well, I was a computer guy. First went to college, and then about a year and a half into my associate's degree, my teacher started a computer company and he made me an offer I couldn't refuse, so to speak. And I went there and started off as a tech. And then within about a month, they promoted me to the VP of consulting. And I managed that company's consulting department for about 5 years. And then the next company that I went to managed their consulting department for 5 years as VP of consulting. And I also did computer water system for Las Vegas Valley Water District. I was the senior designer and project lead. And then I went to Trader Joe's and spent 20 years there.
Did you have any theater background or
no, absolutely none.
experience?
No. And that wasn't what interested me. What interested me was the views, the pictures, the people from a photographer's point of view. Even in my first fair, I was thinking as a photographer. Just loved the way that I could frame the photograph and take pictures and get the people and try and get the feel of it. So it was more of that. That's why I went. Since I was super introverted and didn't really want to talk to people, I wanted to look. I was a people watcher. Wanted to look at things, look at the people, look at the sets, look at the shows, and just kind of enjoy them by myself.
And so did the camera kind of give you an excuse to sit and watch people without necessarily interacting with them?
Yeah, and that actually becomes a stronger thing in my story later on, which we'll get to. It became more important. That's a good catch on your part.
Well, let's go forward a little bit. So you went to the fair and then you took a couple years break. What brought you back to going out there?
Well, I got married and I brought her to the fair. And it turned out she had severe asthma. So we didn't stay very long because she had a severe asthma attack because of all the dust and pollen and everything else that's a fair. There's a picture of her on my website with a fair character wrapped around her being funny. Dan Will was his name. And he goofed around with her. It was a good memory for her. Wandered around the fair a bit, and then she got the asthma, and we had to leave. And then I went back a few years later. She was super sick then. This was more into the early 2000s, and she was basically bedbound and IVs and stuff like that for a few years. And I was basically doing everything I could do to keep her alive and going crazy. So I had my job, I had her, I had a stepson. Life was getting very rough, and I went to the fair, and it was kind of a release. At that point, I was getting a little more into it, and I went one day, looked around, and thought, this is fun. And this is the first time in years that I've actually had fun. And then as I'm driving home, I got lost, and I realized I can't do this anymore. I can't sit here and I mean, I can't keep her alive by myself. She has to want to live. And it got that bad. And it was the fair that made me realize that it separated me from the state that I was in, which was very not healthy for her or me, because I was stifling her a bit. And for me, because I was basically stifling myself. So I thought, it's time to let her do what she's going to do. And yeah, this actually was in 2005, because a couple months later, she passed away. And she was much happier because she saw that I was having fun at things, at the fair and stuff,
Can I interrupt for a sec?
of course.
Was there somebody at fair that reached out to you personally, sort of welcome you into the world of the fair?
Dan Will, the guy I mentioned, he was a great guy. We became friends later, and he kind of escorted me around the fair and showed me around and stuff. Especially after she passed away, which was what I'm going to get to. I decided I didn't want to be in grief, so I started going to I went to that year's fair. That was 2005, a lot. Every weekend, every day. I went to every fair day that it was open, from before it opened to after it closed. Then it moved to Irwindale at that point. And then I started getting more integrated into the fair community, because they started to see me as a regular, and my pictures were on the internet and they loved them. They started to see me as a compadre rather than as just somebody who's around taking pictures.
And was Dan a street performer or an actor, or what was his gig?
He did a little bit of everything. It was one of the singing shows.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was kind of a comedy show with a bunch of women and him, and they would do some body tunes and things like that. Every show I would plop down there and take pictures of the whole show, click, 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 click kind of pictures. They loved it. I went to some of their rehearsals and things and took pictures of those too.
Was it the
No,
Merry Wives of Windsor?
that's the one. That's the one. Merry Wives of
I've
Windsor.
always liked their show. That they have a great show. And so once again, you found your camera was sort of your entree into this world.
Yeah, what actually happened by the next year, by 2006, I realized that I was super shy. Now, there's a difference between being introverted and shy. Introversion is somebody who likes to be alone. Being with people is fine, but they get energy from being alone. Extrovert gets energy from being with people. But shy means you can't talk to people. And I realized I'm fine with being introverted, but I don't want to be shy anymore, because that gets in the way of everything. So I thought, okay, I've got this camera and it's doing pretty good at getting me out there. So I'm going to use the camera to talk to people. So I talked to the camera, so to speak, and then talk to people. And fairs were perfect to do that. I could take a picture and use the camera to help line them up, compose the picture, talk to them a little bit. And I started getting over the shyness and the grief from the wife passing away. And it started to work. Like, oh, I'm not shy anymore.
Did you have a costume with
Yeah.
your camera? What class did you aim for? Or who was your character that
I didn't have a particular character. I just went into a costume shop and said, dress me. I think it was more of a reddish top and with yellow fringes, and just probably a merchant class, I
sounded
guess.
like you were going for middle class? Did you prefer talking to patrons or other participants with your camera?
I did both. At first, it was mostly participants, because they were approachable and they knew to play the game. Then it started getting more and more into the patrons, because I found it was a lot of fun to get some patrons together and shoot pictures of them. They didn't expect it, and they were willing to pose, most of them. and they loved it. And of course, they always wanted to know where the pictures were. And I told them where it was on the internet. There was a lady there who had these huge horses that you could ride on. Her name was Cindy. And we would pose patrons on those horses and take pictures of them with their boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever. I'd sit there for a few hours and photograph those. And I guess it drew people in. So she loved it. So I started to kind of in the booth and things, started to walk in, and then I'd photograph some of the patrons. The booth people all loved it because they could use me and interact with me to get people to be more interested in the wares.
So you were a prop as well.
Yeah, I became a bit of a prop. Everybody expected me to be there. They were always making their little skits around me. So somebody would come running along and say this was stolen and hide it, on my person, and somebody else would come along and with blood in their eyes, looking to execute him or something. And I don't know who he is. I don't know where he went.
What garland are you talking about, officer? I have never seen a garland in my life.
Exactly. I don't even know what a garland is. That kind of thing.
So you would take their picture and then go home and put it on your website, and then
Yep.
did you sort of allow people to download these images of themselves?
Yeah, completely free. They're still up. They're complete. The logoed version is completely free. You can buy copies without the logo. Very few people do. That's not why I have it there. Probably make just enough off of that to pay for the hosting every year. Sometimes they want to put them in a magazine or something, and they ask me, and I say, sure. There's a professional picture they can download that's a little bit more expensive that gives them the rights to do that. And my pictures are all over the Facebook and the internet.
Do you like shoot at high resolution, like at 600 DPI?
I shot at the highest resolution the camera would support. Yeah, when I switched to digital, it was a life-changing experience because then I didn't have to pay to have them developed, then scan them and then put them in the computer. It became much easier, and I wound up taking a lot more pictures. So I went to fairs where I would take 5,000 pictures each day. Yeah, I think there's 300,000 fair pictures and 400,000 belly dance pictures on my site. I got into belly dance. I'll tell you that story in a few minutes. I got into belly dancing photography starting at the fair, but and the photographs were a way for me to kind of give back to the fair people and the dancers. That was my way of giving back.
So how did you get into photographing belly dancing?
Well, 2 years after the wife passed away, so it's 2006. I went to that whole run of Irwindale Fair, and I used to sit down in front of the belly dancers and I photographed them because the colors and the movement was helping me with the grief. I was watching, and there was this lady there named Marjani. She was the tribal leader of Ujam, which was a big show back then. Very traditional belly dancers. And she has like studs and tattoos that she did herself and all kinds of things. And here I am, this conservative guy sitting there, super introverted, in grief. And about halfway through the run, she walks up to me, and I'm like, oh my God, this person's walking up to me. And she's really weird looking and she's scary. I've told her this story many times. She always laughs. So I'll just pretend like she's not there. And she comes up to me and she puts her arm around me, sits down next to me. And I'm like, oh my God. And she says, hi, I'm Marjani. I says, yeah, I know. I watch your show. And she says, well, we would like you to sit in this front row center and take photographs from there. And I said, okay. And she said, we really respect your photographs. And we do want to tell you that any photographer that's sitting in the back row with a big telephoto lens, we kind of think is a little creepy, and we know you're not creepy. So come and sit in the front row center and be part of the group. Basically went up there. And after that, every single show that I was at for them, I had the front row center. And then by the end of the run, she said, I'm going to introduce you to other dancers and you can go photograph them. So by the time I stopped photographing a few years ago, I was basically photographing every single belly dance show in Southern California. And dancers would invite me. They'd give me front row center, backstage. I became a fixture. And they were all sad when I didn't come because I gave them pictures for free as, this is my payback for you being so nice to me. And that really helped with the grief, and it helped with pulling me out of myself and getting over the shyness and all that.
One thing I noticed before we started talking, I looked at some of your both belly dance photos and Ren Fair photos.
Mhm.
I can see how they very easily could be favorites of the person you're taking a picture of.
Mhm.
They're very respectful. You capture a lot of detail, like their makeup, the jewelry that they're wearing. You present it well on them. I can see how you would be welcome at a show. And what was the impetus to do sort of non-California fairs? And if you could give the listeners sampling of the places you have seen fairs?
I'll start with the sampling. Irwindale, of course, Northern Fair, of course, Escondido, Fresno, a couple of small fairs around the area, really small ones, Palm Springs, Coronaburg, that's California fairs. Then I went over to Arizona, Ohio, New York, Texas, Bristol Fair in Wisconsin, Colorado. What else did I go to? I think Missouri. I think there's one in Nevada. There's one in the desert somewhere. Another one in Arizona, Washington. The impetus was I wanted to do fairs all year round. And of course, Northern and Southern, which became my two main fairs, they have relatively short runs and they're only particular times of the year. And Arizona's in a different time of year. And I thought, okay, I'll go to Arizona. And that was so much fun. I did go to the whole run of that most years. I just wanted to get out and go to more and more. And I found that it was a lot of the same people, not always, who just go around fair to fair. Kind of that's why I call it like a circus. Circus performers go from circus to circus, and it's the same kind of community sense of community. And I was part of it. And in fact, some of the fairs even wound up paying me to photograph. Irwindale did, and Wisconsin did, Bristol did, and a couple of the others did. Not a lot, in the hundreds. And I had a pass.
How quickly, when you walk into a sort of a new fair, can you sense, is this going to be a good fair or a bad fair? You're one of the few people I've really talked to who have really sampled a wide potpourri of fairs as sort of both a participant and as an audience member. What criteria do you use when you walk into a fair and begin to evaluate that fair?
It's the pre-fair. If the pre-fair, the show they do before it opens sucks or is weak, then I know the fair is going to be weak. And if the pre-show is strong, the one at Arizona is really strong, or was when I was going. Irwindale's was very, very strong. Northern was pretty good usually. But if that pre-show is weak, that tells me that the fair is going to be weak. Escondido had a very weak pre-show. It was still a good fair, but it wasn't one where I'd go to the whole run. I'd just go once. Just and the pre-show is what the key is. There aren't people motivated enough to get out before the fair and do stuff. That includes the management. That includes everything. When they are that motivated and can go out there. And then the second thing is how true are they to whatever they're trying to portray? Like Irwindale used to be very historically accurate. I gather that it's not anymore. Las Vegas is more of a fantasy Renaissance fair, and that's fine. That's the way they advertise it. But then if the fair advertises itself as a historical accurate fair, but it's not, it's more a fantasy fair, it's kind of a disappointment.
Describe what you consider a good pre-show or opening gate.
Yeah, Arizona and Irwindale both, before the gates open, they actually have a pre-show and all of the groups come out and engage with the audience in some way. Each of the acts there has a little pre-act that kind of introduces you to those characters. They had these two nuns, Nunny Nunnies, I think they're called, that were a comedian group that they would do the Nunny Nunny thing and just for a minute, and you get a feel for that. And then you go, oh yeah, I want to go see Nunny Nunnies. And then Tartanic would come out. They're a pretty good group of drummers and stuff. And they'd walk through and, oh, I've got to see them. So you're getting prepped for the show. Everybody who was into fair knew that you have to be there before it opens because that's when the show actually starts. And then the entire fair is a show. It's different than just having a fair that's a bunch of booths. Escondido is more of a bunch of booths with a fair around it, whereas Arizona's more of a fair with a bunch of booths. Oh, Big Bear Fair was another one I went to. Big Bear was fun, but small, very, very, very tiny. Yeah, you could walk that fair in an hour.
But one thing that fair allowed, I think, was people to sort of find their own niche and then define what that niche is and then do well at it because they basically were doing what they wanted to do. I mean, like you wanted to take pictures of people belly dancing and being on stage and being on the street. And so nobody hired you and said, go and do this. You just sort of made your own job at the fair, taking pictures and distributing them.
And then they'd find their photograph on the internet because it turned out after fair, it became a tradition for everybody to run to the site and see what was that. My site like caved in because of all the people on it in those 2 days after the fair, trying to find their picture.
You mentioned fairs that If there's a lackluster opening gate, it's likely not going to recover and be better once you get in.
The ones that had a lackluster opening gate tended to be the ones that were vendor first, fair second. Whereas the ones that had a nice opening act were fair first, vendor second. And from a patron's point of view, you want to have the fair come first. You want them to come in and enjoy the fair, and then they happen to buy things. But the ones that had a poor opening act, you were going there to buy things.
Do you remember what are your favorite sort of stage shows that you remember? And what are some of the favorite belly dancing shows that you remember?
Hard to remember some of the names, but of course, Merry Wives of Windsor. There was a bird act, a guy with a nice bird. I forget his name.
He
He
was
did
a
an act.
pirate, right?
Yeah, yeah. I forget his name. Got a lot of pictures of him though. There was this guy named Adam. And he was not at Irwindale. He did a juggling act, and he was very, very funny. He would change the act based on what show he was in, so it matched the location. He and I became pretty good friends. Yeah, and Ujam was a very good show. All of the belly dance shows I was at, all of them that I could get to. The belly dance shows in Arizona were my favorite, but that's because I knew all the ladies and they all knew me. And after each show, we'd go off somewhere and I'd do a photo shoot, like a real photo shoot with them. So got one with them hanging from the trees upside down in their fair costumes, and another one goofing around, and another one from 10 feet up, standing on a chair over the top of them. Arizona Fair I really liked the belly dancers. There were two belly dance groups, and both of them were great.
Do you remember any of the vendor booths?
Not by name, but there was one particular booth. She was an actress, a former actress who was in The Adventures of Hercules. The Adventures of Hercules is an old movie from the 70s series. She was in the first season, Mauve, and she had a little booth there that she sold things.
I would like to try a little role play with you.
Okay.
Let's say it's 10:30, so it's really kind of early. The fair is open. You're in the back someplace where it's still cool and shady.
Mm-hmm.
You see a family coming up. There's a girl who's maybe 7, her little brother who's 5. They both are carrying little wooden swords. The girl has a newly purchased garland in her hair, and the boy has a Robin Hood hat, obviously recently purchased. They see you with your camera. The mom also has a garland, but it's a lot older, and the dad has a camera of his own. They
The first
kind of catch your eye. What do you do?
Well, first I approached them and I asked if I could photograph them because I want to do a photo shoot. And they'd say, sure. And I'd say, okay, Dad, put away your camera. You're going to be in the picture this time, because usually that means he's never in the pictures. And then I'd set them up, like have the two kids with their fake swords, maybe do a little fake sword fight, again, with the parents there watching and giving permission. Set them up in various scenarios. The dad and mom a little more romantically, arms around each other, kissing, something like that. Give them some photographs to remember. I mean, nothing like a show, more of posing these people in different positions and things, the family photos kind of stuff. Just give them a good time. Take about 20 minutes. Used to do that with couples a lot. Just pose them in all kinds of good pictures. I'd pose them, and then most people have never been posed before by a professional. So, you need to sit up. Now let's move your face this way, and I want you to understand. And I show them the pictures. This is the before picture with your face that way, and this is the after picture with face this way. You see how, with the lighting in one way, you look about 10 years older. With your lighting the other way, you look about 5 years younger. Which one do you like better? And this one makes you look stern, and this pose makes you look happy. That's the beauty of digital, is I can show them right away and just go through the whole thing. And by the end of it, they're thrilled because they're getting a lesson too in how to photograph. A Colorado Fair one memory, there's this girl, she's walking away from me. And one thing I used to like to do is catch the headshot looking backwards over their shoulder just before they see me. So it's candid. So I snap the picture, and I got one of this girl with purple hair that's like my favorite picture of all. And she found it and she loved it. Then we walked into a photo shoot where I shot her lots of pictures. She wasn't even she was dressed in fair. She had the hat and the outfit, but it wasn't fancy. I was mostly shooting her from the neck up, mostly because I was fascinated by the purple hair and piercings and stuff. Yeah,
I
that's
can see how that would just make someone's total fair experience.
yeah. And that was the point is sometimes I see somebody walking down the street and I see a guy and a girl walking down the street. They don't know each other. And I just start I'd say, "Hey, can I photograph you?" And the guy would say, "Yeah." And then I say to the girl, "Can I photograph you?" "Yeah." So I'm photographing them both. And I said, "Can you get a little closer?" And they would. And I'd make sure that it's all with their consent. A little closer, maybe put your arm around him and arm around her. And they don't even know each other. And before the end of the photo shoot, they're like kissing and stuff. "Okay, you mind if I get that picture?" "Sure." That was always a lot of fun getting people who don't know each other, kind of breaking the wall and taking pictures of them. It was fun.
You have a lot of pictures of nobles.
Yeah.
Is there a particular technique or insights you'd like to share on getting a good noble shot?
Well, first of all, there was the candid shots, and then there was the shots where they knew I was photographing them, and then there was the shots where I was posing them. So there was a guy who was captain of the guard or something, and he's all dressed in this fancy guard outfit. And every year he'd search me out and we'd photograph him in these poses. And we started getting goofy and doing ridiculous poses, like all the guards piled up on top of each other, 5 or 6 high, and then collapsing. And I'd catch the whole thing. The picture that was the favorite of the guards was one of them sitting there, and then all the women sitting around them and staring at him in awe. And then we'd have to do the same thing for the women. And so there'd be one woman in the center, and all the guards around her. You asked earlier about one of my favorite belly dancing groups. It's Arizona Fair, Ghazal Baladi. And I used to go to them every year and I'd photograph them. Those are the ones that I posed.
How about pictures of things like peasants and hobby horses and the green man? Do a really good job of getting the tall people on stilts. Those are nicely framed, and
Mhm.
you sort of get a sense of how big they are and sort of how precarious they are. Those are nicely done.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Those were usually candids. They knew I was there, but they weren't posing for me. I would just keep clicking pictures until I got something. Eventually I learned how to photograph them so that there's something called in photography called the rule of thirds. And you have to align it to you got 3 lines down, 3 lines across, dividing the screen into 9 parts. And you photograph on those lines, and the human eye brain sees them as very attractive pictures. But if you don't photograph according to the rule of thirds, people see them as ugly pictures. So, for example, if you have a mountain range in the background, you want to have it across that top third line, and then the people below that, or maybe the bottom third line and the people above that. But if you have it something different, like maybe crooked, people don't like the picture.
So when you look out the window right now, is there a grid imposed in your eye?
Yeah, been doing this enough where I actually have the grid in my brain.
I noticed another thing about your photos and is that you seem to use depth of field a lot as a way of focusing the viewer's interest.
Yeah, that's a photographer trick also. You fuzz out the background or the foreground to put attention on particular parts of the picture. If it's not important, fuzz it out. Because if you have too much stuff going on, it's one of those rules. The brain gets confused and it becomes a bad picture.
Now, here I'm ignorant, but can you do that digitally, sort of on the fly?
I think the newer cameras have editing tools in them. I'd never had one of those.
Another interesting thing about your photos is that you always seem to find a single interesting focal point for the viewer to latch on to. Because so many fair photos you see, somebody's just standing on a hill shooting down the street, and there's like 20 or 30 people just wandering around. And
Those
you
are
go,
boring pictures. Those are
"Ugh."
boring pictures.
And your stuff, there's usually either somebody sitting on the ground or turning to face a different direction. So you do a good job of finding somebody doing something interesting.
Yeah, as an example, at the Arizona Fair, there's this lady who has bubbles and she shoots bubbles. So I would take a photo of her face on the first third of the horizontal, and then the bubbles in the second 2/3. So you get the scene of her blowing the bubbles. So it makes it very interesting, and everything else is blurred out so that you're getting what you want. So what I wanted was she's blowing bubbles, but the bubbles are the main thing you see, and then her blowing them is the second thing you see, and then you don't see anything else.
What in general are you trying to accomplish with your fair photos other than making people feel good about coming to fair?
Um, First of all, I wanted to let people know that it's enjoyable, it's fun, regardless of whether I like the fair or not. I wanted to get that bit of enjoyment through, and that would help me enjoy it as well. Because there's some fairs you walk into, it's like, oh, they didn't do their homework, but let's get into this and take some good pictures anyway. There were a couple fairs like that, not many. Most of them are pretty good, and
What would you consider them doing their homework or the homework not done?
where the fair is, say, underfunded and it's lacking some things, like the latrines are right in the open, for example, and not hidden out of the way, that's a bad sign. And that's typical of the more poorly managed fairs. Or the food booths are too far away from things or too close. Or it just the setup's bad, or there's still tree limbs in the ground so people can trip. Trip hazards are not good in fairs. They better have insurance. Uh, so it's a lot of physical things like that, or there's not enough characters wandering around doing goofy stuff that characters do, engaging the audience. There's not that pre-show. There also should be an after show. Irwindale and Northern were both very good at having the pre and the after show. So the after show escorted all the people out, and the people they waited for that so they could be escorted out. And then that would continue after you got out of the fair, send you on your way home back into the real world. So when you came in, you got sucked into the ancient world or whatever world they're trying to create in the fair. And when you left, you got kind of like a time portal to the real world. And the good fairs did that very well. The not so good fairs didn't do that at all. You lose the magic.
Right.
And the Irwindale Fair is one and Northern and Arizona were fairs that just did that very, very well. Bristol also very, very, very well. The larger fairs, the ones that had some money and people who cared. Well, you got to have, and most of the fair people do love what they do because, as you pointed out, they don't get paid a lot. A lot of them are volunteers or almost volunteers, and when I look at their hourly rate, it's like you couldn't even get me to talk to you on the phone for that hourly rate, less than you'd make at a McDonald's, kind of hourly rate.
And then you factor in their costume.
Yeah, fairs typically don't fall apart because they're not paying people well enough. They fall apart because the management doesn't care. Well, let me put it to you this way. When the people who work in the fair become a commodity instead of people, the fair is dead. You might as well die. When the fair says, we can just replace you, that's when the fair dies and becomes basically just a money-making machine that's not making a lot of money usually.
I'd like to do a counterfactual with you.
Sure.
In a world that the Renaissance Fair does not exist, how would your life have played out?
Very differently. I'm gonna put in my belly dancing friends in the same bucket
Okay, that makes
because
sense.
they work together for me. It would have been very, very different. First of all, Renaissance fairs taught me that. See, I grew up in an abusive family. Being young, it was abusive, mentally abusive, and it taught me that there were people who were out there who weren't trying to harm you. They were just having a good time. People with their own things going on and their own problems, and sometimes grumpy, and sometimes people are out to harm you. But for the majority of the people at the fair, they're just trying to live their lives, and it taught me that not everybody's a danger, which was not the lesson that I learned from my childhood. I learned the lesson in childhood that everybody's a danger. The belly dancers reinforced that because they were all very friendly. They liked my pictures. They liked me. I was very respectful for them. I wouldn't have put myself out there. Wouldn't have taken the chances to be with other people, and got a lot of friends out of it. A lot of good friends. A lot of good times. I think it was well over 400 fairs and 1,200 belly dance shows that I attended during an 8-year period. And it got to the point where every year I had a birthday party, and every year I'd have between 50 and 200 dancers and fair people come and actually put on a show for me for the whole night. So having the gentlemen adventurers, they would bring the whole troop over and have sword fights in the middle of the hall that I rented for my birthday party. Dancers would come and dance. Their husbands would sit in the corner being bored because they've seen the same dance 50 billion times. I wouldn't have had those experiences, and I probably would have been a little more sour and bitter and introverted So fairs were the first time that I actually was part of a community. It was
When the fair
third,
became your community of reference, were your parents still alive, or did they have any thoughts on young Richard running away to the circus?
no, my parents and I stopped talking to each other long before that.
Did you stay in touch with any other family members?
My sister and I get along great. My sister is a success story. I'll tell you and give you a 2 minute clip. She's epileptic and she grew up thinking that no man would ever love her because who would love an epileptic who could have a seizure at any point in time? She'd have grand mal seizures right there. And she went through college, got her degree, and she met in college her kin. They're still married. And she had 5 kids. The middle kid was autistic. The kid went to school. They wanted to give him some new drugs, and she said, "Hell no." She started homeschooling the kids. Then thought she, okay, I like the schooling thing, and she started her own school that she now owns with 2,000 students every year, principals, teachers, the whole thing. She owns it. It's a nonprofit, and the epilepsy, interesting enough, turns out not to be a big problem for her anymore.
And
She's in the
she
West Coast.
approves of the fair in your life?
She approves of anything that makes me happy and makes me a better person, and I'm the same way with her.
I'm beginning to run out of words. So when
Well,
you
I can
were
tell you a
kind of,
couple stories if you want to help with that, but go ahead.
no, go ahead and because basically I was going to ask an open-ended question like if there's something you wanted to be sure to mention, now would be a good time to trot them out.
Sure, I'll do that. One of my favorite people at the fair was another photographer. His name was Gar, and he was the owner of Gar Photos. He's passed away since, and his site's still up, I believe. And he used to take the best photos. His are far better than mine. He used to photograph coins, and he got into the fair, and everybody knew him. And he was a phenomenal person. He'd wander around and take, whereas I used to take 5,000 pictures at the fair, he'd take 50, and his 50 would be an order of magnitude better than mine. There's nobody who compares to his pictures. He did the same thing. He put them on the internet and gave them away. Because of that, the two of us got to take pictures of everything. I don't know if that went the direction you wanted, but that's some of the stuff I learned from fair.
Oh, well, that works for me.
I'm trying to
So
think if I have a favorite fair story that I can finish with. So let me think for a minute.
I can give you my traditional closing question.
Okay.
It's another role play. Congratulations, you have just been awarded the highly coveted Phyllis Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fair Skills Applied to Life. The band has been told to sit on its hands, and you have as much time as you like. Give me your acceptance speech.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the award. I I've enjoyed fair for many years. It helped drag me out of some hard points in my life, where I went down deeper than anybody should go, and help the fair people helped pull me out of those dire straits just because they were so open to having somebody in their midst and who's willing to play with them. And that changed my life because I became a better person because of the fair and all the related activities and things. And that would be it.
Oh, I know what you can add. Just give me your website address where they can see all your photos.
Well, let me do 2 things. If it's all right with you, I'll give you a quick blurb about what I do for a living, and then I'll give you my website for the photos, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. I'm a ghostwriter. I own the Writing King. And what I do is I write books for people. Mostly those books are for people who want to use that book to help their career in some way. But I also write children's books and fiction books and novels and things like that. Um, so, if anybody needs that kind of service, you can get hold of me at the Writing King, thewritingking.com. If you want my photos, those are all at richardlowejr.com. So fully spelled out, richardlowejr.com. So those 2 sites, you can get hold of me. And if you do want to get hold of me, go to the Writing King. There's a contact form, enter your information, and I'll eventually get back to you.
Is
And even
Junior spelled out or just JR?
JR. So it's
Well,
R.
Richard, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I've learned a lot, so thank you very much. And thank you for being here on Fair Folk at Work.
Thank you very much.
That's my February 2024 interview with Richard G. Lowe Jr. If you have questions or comments about the podcast itself you'd like to send to me, email me them at djng@earthlink.net. If you or somebody you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, email me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.